All right, so it's been a minute since we did animating in terms of a shot. So let's go ahead and just review the process real quick to have it fresh in our minds and do some additional planning to prepare us for what is going to need to be created. So when we talk about the animation process, for a large shot, we're going to be approaching it with a pose-to-pose method. When we do the pose-to-pose method, there are certain poses we want to think about. The first poses are generally the extremes. Extremes can be thought of as the first frame and last frame of the shot. I like to expand that out to the first frame and last frame of an action. So you can think of it either way, depending on what works best for you. But the extremes are generally going to be the first things we think about, is where we begin and end, and the time range that we're going to need. Now, I would say setting your extremes in 2D art is probably more important than in 3D because 3D is pretty flexible. Regardless, though, it's good to keep in mind the extremes. And that can also be thought of as when one action begins and one action ends. All right, so we'll talk a bit about that as we go. Now, the next important thing are going to be your keyframes. The keyframes are the necessary frames required to tell the story. These are going to be the frames that really have the big actions in mind and are going to be what we largely get in our block-in, in our first block-in pass. So they are important to identify so we know what we are setting out to do in the first pass of animation. Following the keyframes, we have our breakdowns. Our breakdowns are how we get from one keyframe to the next. So you can think of keyframes as the key story and breakdowns as how one keyframe transitions to another. These generally happen in the second pass, but sometimes we can do them in the block-in. And a lot of the times these are going to be things like anticipation, as we saw with the bouncing ball. But they can also be other things as well. All right, so just be aware of that with the breakdowns. When we get to the final type of keyframe is the in-betweens. And if you remember, the in-betweens are mostly done for us. This is what is generally done by Maya, but that is not always the case. A lot of the times, if we're dealing with things like grabs and object interactions, we do need to add in our own in-betweens, and these often are corrective frames. This isn't always the case. Sometimes you have an in-between for the sake of things like exaggeration. So exaggeration may be it. Sometimes it's for things like clarity. So there can be a lot of reasons to add these in. But these are going to be the types of keyframes we're going to be looking for. First is going to be our extremes. Second is going to be our keyframes. Third is going to be those breakdowns. And then finally, the in-betweens. And this is a maybe, not always needed type thing. But just be aware of that. Depends on your animation style and what you're going for. Now, what might be useful for us is to try and identify our keyframes for this particular animation. Where are they at and what are we going to need? So what I have here is my reference board here, my peer ref, and I've put my storyboard onto here, and we can think about what kind of keyframes and key poses we might want to have. And this is a chance for us to kind of author these and think about how we want them to move. For example, what does a relaxed pose look like, a discovery pose, those types of things. Now, I feel like in my storyboard, I've captured most of the keyframes we're going to need in the drawings I've done here. There's some refinement that I'm going to definitely need to get, but I think for the most part, these are working. So if you have not already done so, fleshing out a storyboard to this extent, I encourage you to do so to try and figure out what your key poses are going to be for your animation. So go ahead and, as a challenge, try and identify the key poses you will need for your specific animation. If I go ahead and identify mine, in each of these shots that we have here, and the first one, it's kind of the resting pose. That's going to be the one that I need, a neutral, and that's going to bzz all the way up here to the gem. From there, the character is just going to look down. I don't really need to adjust the arms at all because it's a robot. We can keep it very mechanical. After that, we're going to need some sort of anticipation pose, anticipating into the pickup. We're going to need a grab pose, a lift pose, a throw pose, and then we're going back to our neutral pose to move forward. So in total, we're not really going to need that many poses for this complex animation. Yours may require more depending on what kind of story you've put in place. So go ahead and try and identify them so heading into it, you know what to expect. And with that, let's go ahead and move into doing our block in and blocking in the extremes and the mean keyframes. Next. All right, so let's go ahead and get started blocking in this animation. We can start with our rough time frame here that we have. And remember, the way I like to animate is with the setup here where I use the split screen. If you don't have the split screen already set, you can press that button to get to the split screen. And you can come up here to perspective, switch to your perspective view, and grab that shot cam we set up earlier. With that, I like to have the outliner open, and I might switch to the animation view, actually. If we want to have access to the graph editor early on, now that we know how to use it, we can come up here to Windows, Workspaces, and switch over to the animation workspace. We'll have to reset our screen. That's okay, though. We know how to do it. We'll just, once again, come to our split, panels, and shot cam. Now, it's a little bit tight here, but it does give us everything we need, and we can see what we're doing. So over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just posing my character to be in that relaxed position. And I want to make sure that I have this border edge showing here with my camera. Now, if you don't remember how to turn on the film gates, it's these icons here. The first icon will put a box. The second icon will put this sort of white area here. All right. And that's going to be what I'm looking for. With that, what we can do is we can go ahead and start positioning this. So the first thing that I'm going to want to do is come in here and just relax this into that relaxed patrolling pose that our character has, or at least is going to have. So I'll rotate this arm down. I can come across and rotate this arm down. And I'm just using the rotate tool, no fancy tools required. I'm going to bring the arms forward, and then I'm going to rotate the hands here on X so that we have our little fingers out and ready. And I might actually put these at a little bit of an angle. If you look at our screen here, we want to think of the silhouette of the character, and we're not really seeing that the character has pincer hands. So I might just angle those so we get a better look at that character actually has these sort of pincer hands going for grabbing things. And I might put a bit more bend to it. I might even angle them out a bit just so they read a bit better on camera. And then we'll go ahead and get the pincers into their position. So take your time with these poses. You have to think of these poses as drawings. You'll notice I accidentally selected the sky back there. I set those to a layer so I can set that to reference. Make sure anything you don't want to select is on a reference. But take your time crafting these poses. You want to really make sure they read well, and you want to think of them as a drawing. So the same amount of time you would be taking to make a beautiful drawing, you do want to think about taking for these poses. So maybe not quite the same amount of time because it's kind of already drawn for us. But when you're an animator, that's really what you are doing. You're thinking about how these are going to look. All right, these are the keyframes. These are the drawings. If you're thinking traditional two-dimensional Disney, which I'm realizing a lot of you may not have ever seen. You're getting old. But they would take a lot of times with their drawings to make them as beautiful as possible. And we want to think in the same mindset. So I'm just trying to make this look nice and clear so we can see those hands and we can see that clear silhouette. Now, if we want to, you can actually come up here to show and you can turn off your nerd's curves. And we can see this here free of blemishes. We could also move this light off screen if we turn our lights back on. I'll just go ahead and move this to a corner of the screen here, since we're probably not going to adjust that anytime soon. And just set that back to a reference, and there we go. So once we have that pose, I'm just going to highlight the whole thing and just hit the S key, all right? Just smashing that S key so all of my controls get a keyframe. Now, I'm not going to worry about my graph right now. You'll see it is here. I'm just going to shrink it down. We don't really need this for the block-in. We might use it for retiming, but there we go. So the next thing we can do is we can check the timer we put down, and we put 12 to 24 frames here, and we put 48 frames here. So that's a lot. We could maybe add the 24 to this. We could maybe think about how this looks moving at 24. We could just do some quick experimenting. We could see, okay, what does this look at? 48, which was the initial go of things without the establishing shot. And we can move this forward. And In particular, you'll notice I also am going to have to move this down. And I'll have to change the position of the arms. But that's okay. I'm thinking of my extremes to begin with and the framing I'll want to have. So maybe around here. And I might have the arms a little bit of ways. But I want to really think about the framing of where this is going to be at on screen. So once I have that set, I'm just going to hit the S key on that control, go back to the beginning and hit play to see how this looks. So that is pretty quick. It looks like he's moving with intent. He's not really just sauntering about and wandering. Now, this is where the graph editor can come in handy. We could think, okay, well, what if we add another second to that? So we could go 48 plus 2 puts me at 68 plus 4 puts me at 72, I believe. And if you need to, remember, you can always pull out your calculator and just calculate that out. So 48 plus 24, 72. So that's going to put us at 3 seconds. So I'll just move this back to 72. And in my graph editor here, with this control selected, I can hit F to frame. I can then highlight these keys, hold down Shift and middle mouse button, and nudge them over. Now you notice nothing happened here, and that's because I'm at the time. But if we go ahead and hit play, you'll see that this is going to be moving quite a bit slower through the scene here. I think that works okay. I don't want it to take too long. It still looks like it's kind of moving with intent, so I may want to consider making it take even longer. Just depends on how many frames we want to have to render. Now, I don't want this to take forever to render, so I'm going to go ahead and just leave it here at this rate, and we'll get that set up. But while I'm at it here, I'm going to make some changes so that way it doesn't quite penetrate the sand here, if that makes sense. And since it's such a long distance it's transversing, we shouldn't run into too many issues with it. I'm going to come into this pose here, and since our perspective has kind of changed since we're getting closer, I can adjust some of the poses here so that they read a little bit better. And this will give us some secondary animation as we go. Notice I am on frame 72, so I have changed to that frame. Make sure you make that change if you're going to be making the adjustments so it looks better on that frame. And we can just tweak these here. I may also want to consider some changes here now that I'm working in 3D, because a lot of the times 2D just does not translate to 3D the way we would like it to. I might move the ball back a bit, and that way when he looks down, he has time to kind of move forward. So it would be a look down, move forward now, so I have to rethink my keyframes. This allows me to kind of get these more relaxed looking, perhaps, while on screen. And we'll have to see how it transitions from one pose to the next. I don't really like how the silhouette of these is reading right here. I might have to make a slight adjustment. I could even make that adjustment on the wrist rather than the arm, so that way they're aimed more forward. And I'm going to do the same here and maybe open these a bit more than they were, or at least the top one. I kind of like the placement at the bottom. I also might bend the finger a little bit more so it's not behind the gem, just to create a better sense of depth. And I may even move the ball backwards a bit more here, the character backwards a bit more, to have a better sense of shading. I like the alignment. I don't really want to push it this way, but I could if necessary. I may tweak some things like the arm here, just to make it look more straight, mainly just bias the hands. So let me go ahead and highlight that and hit the S key now. And we actually have a lot of movement between point A and point B, but it shouldn't be that noticeable. It should look mostly like a change of perspective, with an exception of that outer hand. I think I'm going to change that in the first view just to look a little bit stronger. So let's come back into this view here. I'm going to bring this one to be more like what I was seeing in the next one, with the hand biased towards the inside in terms of the silhouette, like so. That way, it doesn't look like he's twisting his wrist coming over. So let's just see how that looks. It still moves quite a bit, but those are things I can adjust. So let's see what's changing the most. I think it's mainly the upward angle. And these are some things that may get hammered out in refinement as well. It may be something that just is not quite looking right on our curve. But I think that gives me an okay start there in terms of getting the robot in here and moving. So it looks like they're kind of patrolling. Then the robot's going to stop here. And this is my stop pose. So with this one, we have the discovery, stop, rotates, 8 frames, stare, 12. So remember this idea of moving holds. I don't know if we've talked about moving holds too much. Maybe we did on the ball a little bit. But when we talk about a moving hold, it's where we have a keyframe where the character essentially does nothing and anticipating it doing something. So for example, if we want this character to stop, we need to think of the stop as an action, and then we need to think of the stare as an action. So the character is going to stop first and then move to stare, if that makes sense. So this is kind of my extreme here. What I'm going to do next is come to frame 80. I'm going to highlight my controls for my character here and just hit the S key to create a hold. So between 72 and 80, they're going to do nothing. Then between 80 and 88, what I'll do is I'll have the character rotate to make it look like they're staring at the stone. So we'll try and create a line between the eye and the stone so we get that clear indication that the character is staring. And I'm going to highlight everything and hit S, and we'll add a little bit of movement to that later, but what we should see now when we hit play is the character comes forward, stops, and stares. And you'll see how that gives us a little bit of room to breathe with the stop and stare there. And we'll do some things to make that smoother later on in refinement, but in blocking, we just need to think about those key story points. So now we get that idea of it stopping and staring. To make it a little bit easier to do this character here, I'm also going to turn my treasure rig off for the controls. I'm going to set that to a reference or toggle visibility maybe. That way I can't select them. And then I can continue out my storying here. So we're going to stop and we're going to stare for about 12 frames. Now what that means is it's a moving hold. So from 88 to 100, I believe, we can do some quick math here. 88 plus 12. To frame 100, we're just going to hold this pose. And that's going to be it. So after that, we can begin the next action. And once again, I'm adding that hold so they stay staring. So this is going to be where we anticipate up and then lift. So I'll get the anticipate in there. This is kind of a breakdown, but I like to get any sort of lift in my story here because it's kind of important. And with this particular one, it is going to move back and then forward quite a bit. So I have the anticipate going for about 8 frames. I think we're going to go bigger on the anticipate and go about 12. And here, I'm going to get the ball downward and maybe rotating a little bit in terms of the torso. Actually, I don't know if we would need to do that. I do like that idea, though. We'll go with it. It'll be a nightmare to remove it if we don't want it. But we're going to have this character rotate out, and I'm going to have the hands come out, so that way it's kind of clear that this character is going to get ready to lift this. And what I'm doing here is I'm giving it anthropomorphic characteristics. So that's where we give human characteristics to something that is not human. That's the idea here. So we can really get a feel for this and connect with it on a human level. All right, so let's get those anticipates. This arm's kind of going crazy on me, looking a bit like a spider. And we'll just get the fingers ready. So think about how a human might go about grabbing it. And I think I might go up a bit. I think I went down. We're going to come up, and I might even come over in this pose. So I don't even know if this is so much of an anticipate anymore. We might do an anticipate into an anticipate. Let me get the fingers wider. So we get the idea that he's ready to grab. And just remember, while I'm posing this, I'm not really looking in my perspective view so much as I am looking in my camera view. Because what I care about is what the camera sees. I don't necessarily care about what it looks like in perspective when we're doing animation for film, at least. Okay, so take your time with the pose. I want to open this up a little bit more here. Those feel kind of clamped down. There we go. I think that looks kind of nice. I might even bring this one up more, or even down more. Yeah, I think something like that. And back. And we have some asymmetry to our pose, but in animation, twinning is okay. Obviously, you don't necessarily want perfect twinning. That's where each side looks the same, but it's actually okay if they do look fairly similar. I think that looks okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just hit the S key on that now. So we'll just grab that and hit S. And let's hit play just to see how this looks so far. So we stop, we stare, we anticipate up, and then we're going to go for the grab. So I think that feels pretty good. We might ultimately end up slowing that down a little bit, but I would definitely say that animation pose at this point is a key pose that's needed because we are actually moving forward in this sort of grab pose. So the next thing we need to do after the anticipate is move into that grab pose, which I think we'll do on an 8-frame setup here. So we're going to go to 120. And you'll see I'm out of room here. I'm just going to crank this out to 200. Not going to go crazy with it because I probably don't need to go much past here, but I do want to give myself enough time to work. So let's go to frame 120. And since we're doing that hierarchy-based animation, we're going to move the body first, which can be a bit tricky. We're going to have the character come down, and we're going to have the character grab this. So I'm going to have to really work on this quite a bit. I may just set my arm here to 0, 0. Sometimes I like to reset things, especially with rotations. You don't want this to start spinning in circles, and we'll actually probably have to do some of that in refinement here. But you'll see I'm going to zero out this entire arm here, except for the fingers probably, and start moving it from this point rather than moving it from the pose I already had. That will just make things a bit easier. And we want to think about how a grab might look. We don't necessarily want it to have too much bend. Also, I might want to reset the rotates on the body here a bit. Actually, not the body so much as the head. It's kind of nice these are separate because this isn't going to affect the animation so much. We might want to reach forward to be out of the way here so that when we grab, we have this better sense of reaching. And that's something I didn't really think about in 2 dimensions, right? So if I go ahead and get this set up here with the reach, we can have a bit of a different look up top. And you notice I'm doing some back and forth now between the arm and the body. That's kind of inevitable in this setup. We're using what's called an FK rig, a forward kinematic rig. So a lot of the times you do have to kind of backpedal to get things looking just the way you want it to. But that's starting to look pretty cool as a pose. I really like that. And I like how that arm there is pushing back. So I feel like we've actually done a really good job in this pose. So I'll give myself a pat on the back for that one. I'm going to turn on my wireframe just so I can see these interactions a little bit better. My light helps, but not as much as it could. I also might consider framing this up so the fingers are a little bit more even in terms of the work they're doing, because right now it's a little bit biased towards one side, I would say. So once again, I'm not too worried about the penetration there. I think the refractions in the shader will do away with it. But that looks really cool. And what we can do is bring this arm back a little bit more, maybe even down, and have it kind of swing down and out. I do want to keep the full arm on screen just for clarity, so the audience knows it didn't go anywhere it's not supposed to. And I might want to clear the silhouette of the gem, so we have the idea of this arm kind of reaching backwards and that arm reaching forward. This doesn't feel like a very robotic motion at this point. I'll be completely honest with that, but I do actually really like the feel of it. I feel that is quite nice. I'm also going to open up these hands here as sort of a counterbalance. And I might end up changing that. I don't know if I want those to clamp or not, but we can spend a moment here just kind of rotating this hand to see what looks good. And that's a pretty cool pose. I like that one for the grab. So I'm just going to highlight those and hit S, and let's see. Let's go ahead and hit play and see our progress so far, just to make sure these are all making sense. We look, we anticipate, and we grab. Now, you'll notice that we are going to need a breakdown between those poses. You can see how when we grab, it does some really weird stuff. and it kind of goes in the ground. That's going to be something we'll need to change. We might also want to look at the 2 frames and how they transition. So we do have this nice forward movement here. I think that works. We kind of come up and then forward and down. And then when it comes to the arm, we're in and then we're out. We might want to anticipate forward more with the arm in this pose. So I might go to the previous frame and think of this as needing to be swung. So in this case, what I'll do is make kind of a fist arm here. And I didn't really know exactly where I was going with my pose yet, which is okay. I'll fully admit to you, I spend most of my days as a 3D modeler and rigger, not as an animator. So I probably need a little bit more experience setting some keys every now and then to be able to predict everything. There we go. So we'll kind of put that into a fist and bend this arm more in anticipation. And we're thinking of this as kind of like a squash frame, right? So that's the idea behind this. We're kind of squishing the body down in the pose in our anticipation before we go into this swing here. And what we'll see here is we should see a nice movement there between that arm. And when I do the breakdown pass, I'll probably want to think of the silhouette and kind of clearing things. Now, if we want to, we can kick this into step mode at this point, just highlighting these. And if you remember down here, the little staircase icon is going to be our step mode. We can click into that, and we can get a better read of how these poses are by themselves by just hitting play. You'll see that it takes a while for that pose to go, but we can get a better read at how strong those poses are currently. So it's a good idea to switch into step mode every now and then. It's a little bit weird with those long distance runs, but it works. Now, before you get too far ahead of yourself, make sure you save. I'm going to do a file save scene as, and I'm going to save this as robot animation 01, and I might add an underscore 01 to it. So I'm going to make it the first animation, the first iteration of that animation, and save. Okay, so now we're getting into the complex stuff, which is the picking up of the stone, and this is going to require us to kind of work with 2 objects. This is extremely challenging because you want to make sure you get your constraint right. If you get your constraint wrong, you're going to be in an annoying place because retiming constraints is not easy, but yeah, we can make it work. So the grab and lift, we have that set to be 20 frames. We anticipated for 8. So this is the grab here. I think after the grab, we wanted that to go for 12 frames, it seems like. So we can get into the lift pose. So 1 to 32. I can do this without the object needing to be animated yet. Or I could just set the grab now. So maybe we could do the grab constraint now and then do the lift pose. It doesn't really matter. And the nice thing about the lift pose is we'll have the object in our hand, so we probably do want that. So let's go ahead and get that set. I'm going to set this back to auto tangents just so we have this moment kind of captured. And we're going to set up our keyframes on our control here the same way we did in testing. I'm going to bring back my treasure control. I'm going to come over here to the treasure rig and expand this out, expand out the treasure control group, treasure placement, treasure offset, treasure control. And you'll see there is the treasure parent group that we're looking for towards the bottom. I'll take that hand first. Make sure I'm on the frame it's keyed at grabbing, which is 120. And we'll have to work around that frame and timing. I'll control click the parent group and we'll do our constrain parent, go into the option box, make sure maintain offset is turned on and hit apply. So at this stage, this is fully following the rig, and you'll see if I hit play, it looks like the character is coming and very dramatically slamming it into the ground. Very different story. Kind of cool watching things in reverse. Maybe we can make that as a different animation. All right, so we're going to select the constraint here at the time we want it to be on, which is 120 in my animation. Yours may be different. Click on that. Move over here into the channel box, and we want to keyframe whatever has the W here. You'll see it's left wrist control W0. That stands for left wrist control. That's what is in charge. And W0 is weight, and it's just the weight order. If we have more than one, which we might, it would have another key in there. So we're going to set that to 1 and right click and hit key. That way it is set up. And then coming back to frame 19, you'll see that moved. We're just going to go and 0 this, and right-click and key. So this is going to be a one-frame keyframe setup here, where at one frame it's not constrained, and at one frame it is. And what that does is it just guarantees that there is a seamless transition between these. It's kind of a teleportation trick. So now as our character moves, you'll see it's no longer placing it in the ground, it's already there. The character comes and then grabs. So let me save that. And we can do our next pose, which is lift. So I said that was about 12 frames we're going to go for. So 132. And we can move this into the lift object frame. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'll start by rotating the body. And I'm going to move the body down a little bit and backwards. So that way, when we lift, what happens is we're going to kind of scoop it up. And you can see how that goes there. Now, I might need to make some changes here, but I need to drop the elbow here and rotate this so that it's looking at it at the face level. Now, I might have to increase the elevation of my character a bit as we go here, because he does have some really long arms, but this will allow me to get this pose. I don't want the character's elbow disappearing under the sand dune, so we're going to just bring that character up. And I might even work it into the x-axis now a little bit. It's hard to say. I don't want it to be drifting a whole lot between these poses, because this is a pretty dramatic transition. And I forgot to hit the S key, so make sure you either have auto keyframe on or make sure you hit that S key if you've made good progress. I'm not working with the auto keyframe because, like I mentioned, it often causes more grief than it's worth, especially when you're first starting out or when you're talking. So let's just continue to get that pose. And just in terms of composition, I'm going to try and get this onto the third here. And we'll rotate this so it's looking at it. We can get the head looking at it. And I might angle it up a smidge more. That way we have the idea of this looking at it up in the sky. Might also give us a cool effect opportunity with our render. And we're just going to bring this arm back down. I will make sure this reads clearly in terms of a silhouette, which arm's in charge. And I want to make sure the entire arm is on frame and not hidden behind the sand dune. This would also be a good opportunity to film yourself to kind of see what your hands do when you're observing something, and more importantly, what your other hand does. Maybe it could be moving or flexing or something. I'm not really sure. I don't have reference of myself. I don't know what I look like observing a shiny stone lifted to the sky. But something like this. And let's relax this hand so it's not up and about. And once again, think about how it looks to the camera, not necessarily how it looks in three-dimensional space. I might want to get a little bit more distance between the character and the stone. And we can always sync the character back onto screen a little bit better. I may even give the character a little bit more twist here. Bring the stone back on. And you do have to, think about the constraints you're working with there in terms of positioning and the sky and all those types of things. This may be a little bit too rotated here. I might even return this to the 0-0 rotation and just kind of restart. So that way I can tell I'm not getting too many crazy values. But then again, I do feel like we're still getting quite a few crazy values here. So let's hit the S key on that and just see how this looks in terms of getting the pose there. So we have our character come, they're going to look, swoop and grab, and then examine. So that felt pretty good. I like how the character's kind of sinking back there. We'll have to put a motion trail on it later on to really confirm this is what we want, but I think I can live with that. Now, we're going to observe this rock for about 24 frames, which means we're going to add all sorts of little breakdowns that are going to be making the character look it over. But in the block and pass, we're just going to have the characters stare at it, which is kind of funny. So I set it to be a 24 frame stare, and I think I'm good with that. We're at 132. I could do this math in my head, but I don't feel like it. 132 plus 24 is going to put us at 156. So I'm going to go to 156. I'm going to highlight the controls and smash the S key. Now, with that said, I'm actually going to turn off the controls for the treasure again. So that way, when I highlight everything and hit the S key, I don't keyframe those. And we can move on to the next one, which is going to be having the character toss this. So we're going to have a toss frame and an anticipate down frame. Now, since I twisted this so much, I'm going to include the anticipate down in this. And we have it set as a 12 frame operation to chuck it over the shoulder. I might split it to 8 and 8, an 8 frame anticipation down and an 8 frame chuck, and then we could change that around depending on what looks good. So 164 puts us at 8 here. So we're just going to do that as our downward anticipation. And think about if I'm going to throw something over my shoulder, what needs to happen. This arm's going to need to extend out a bit here, like so. And, if I grab something that I can hold, and just kind of place it in my hand to kind of give me some weight, I can think about what happens there. My wrist is going to roll a little bit this way. And in terms of the body, if I'm going to chuck it over my shoulder, so where's the energy need to go? Does it need to go down or up? If I go up, then it gives me room to go down. So I think we could probably go upwards a little bit with this setup here. We could move the head downward. Maybe even consider looking away from the object to show that it's not important anymore. And what's the other arm going to do? So this one's going to come down. What I might do is just kind of tuck the other arm a bit in anticipation. So maybe what we're going to do is we're going to throw this arm outward. I think that would make sense. So I'm just going to move this in, and I want to make sure it's reading clear as not going near the silhouette. So we're going to kind of come out and over with it. And think about how a fist might look like for this character. I think we already kind of have it there, but we could maybe more intensely bring these together. And just remember, this is going to show up in the refraction of the crystal. We'll have to decide if that's something we want to see or not, or if we want to position this a bit differently here, where it's not inside that crystal, which is going to be a bit strange, kind of tucking it under the body here. And it's going to look weird in 3D, but once we get it into 2D, it's going to make a little bit more sense. So you can see how I'm getting that under the body there, and it looks super weird in our 3D view. And we'll just kind of clear the silhouette there. You can see how that negative space is getting really busy between the arm. I might even go as far as to rotate this back out this way, and consider rotating this off of screen a bit, or maybe even above the crystal might be a good idea. So we still see it, we get this idea of it tucking, but it's not affecting our view of the crystal. Very challenging with the spindly arms this character has, but still possible. And we want to make sure that it's reading clearly as whatever the action is we're trying to do, which can be challenging at times, especially when you're doing this anthropomorphic type stuff. What I might do here is explore what it would look like to set these back to 0 and bring them together this way so that they're very narrow in design. And I think that looks pretty good. And we'll have to see this one through, just kind of see how this action goes. Sometimes you don't know how something's going to look till you get the keyframes in there, and you have to tweak it after. But we'll go ahead and hit the S frame on that and just see how that looks between these two frames where we're kind of coming down. And you'll see he does this really crazy wind up here. That's going to be a correction we need to make. This is a challenge you run into a lot with rotations. So if I look at the shoulder here, you'll see that we have 6, -50, and 38. And then at the next frame, you'll see we have -360, 348. So what we could do is we could try dropping the 3 in front of these and get this back to 0 or something like that, and just try and avoid getting into the 360-degree rotations. 360 degree is a full spin. So just kind of be mindful of that. And with that in place, we should get a better read on this. Just kind of coming up into here. And you'll see now that gets rid of that. So just watch out for that in the rotations. You will encounter that every now and then. But let's see how that reads as an anticipate. I think it reads close enough to an anticipate. And then we'll just get the throw in there to see how things look from there. All right, so that's the anticipate down. Let's get the throw frame. So 8 frames, 8. If we take 6 of those, it puts us at 70, so 72. And what we're going to do here is start out with the throw arm and the body. So the body's going to come down and rotate backwards a bit to make it possible to do this throw. So remember, we're still thinking hierarchical. And just be mindful if you've rotated the head a lot that it may throw off what you need for the body. From here, we're going to make it clear that it's being thrown over the head. And we'll bend the elbow and the wrist. And we'll want to think about that posing there in terms of something like the head. I may want to twist it more the opposite way. I also want to make sure that it still stays visible here as much as possible, because seeing the face is important in terms of animations. I might want to get that rotation to be a bit stronger as well. We're working with a pretty tight space here, so it's not the easiest to work with in terms of getting this set up. It's also important to understand we can work the body rotation a lot more. So I'm going to hit the S key on that just to see how this is transitioning. We get a good sense of it there, but I think I still want to continue the body out more, so that way we get a even better sense of this. Maybe even bring this over a bit and this over here a bit just to make it look better on frame. And as far as the throw goes, we can very likely come into the wrist here and angle that a bit. And then with this arm, we're going to bring it down and we're going to release the energy. So the entire point of this arm was to basically get this to rotate outward now so that it's more flat here. And I'm going to be mindful of how that looks in correlation to the dunes, because I don't want to lose my arm's visibility there. You want to keep your character whole as much as possible when animating and on the screen so it reads clearly. And maybe spread the hands out here so we get this idea of the fingers kind of spreading, alleviating that built-up energy. I might angle this a bit differently just to change where it looks like the trajectory is going here, because I'm going to ultimately want that to end up kind of behind the character. And let's hit the S key on that. I want to track the motion, so we're kind of swooping under. I could consider swooping forward a little bit here, but I don't know if that would make sense. So, actually looks quite nice. Okay, so let's go ahead and see how this reads now. And remember, we can always put finishing touches on our pose later. Okay, so now we have another challenge, which is getting this out of the character's hand. How are we going to do that? And more importantly, when are we going to do that? So make sure your timing looks good for your throw before moving to this next section. And we want to look for when we think this thing would be releasing from the hand, and we want to do it at a clear point, which I think right around here would be pretty good. One thing you might think is, what happens if we toggle the constraint? If I set that to 0, you'll see it's going to jump right back to there. So what we're essentially going to need to do is use its controller to counter animate it to get it to be in the correct spot. So around 168, I think, is a good release point here. I'm going to come into the constraint. I'm going to right-click and key selected. And then at 69, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to set this to 0. And then I'm going to right-click and key selected, which is going to pop it right back into place. Now, to get this to match in location, I'll turn back on my treasure controls, and you'll see those move with it. At this frame here, 168, I'm going to take this main control and hit the S key so that it has this key at 000. I'm going to create a locator by going to create and locator. And that creates this nice little locator for us in the scene where we can track things, and we can track one point of the ball. So I'm going to point here. I'm going to make that my track point. So that is going to be one of those top little edges. And then moving to frame 69, using this control, we can place this around that area to get it in a similar position. I could also place the locator at the center of this ball. That might actually be a better way to do this. So let me undo a couple times here. 168, we can actually take this locator here. We could select the geometry for the ball or the control, doesn't matter. I'll take the control here, shift select the locator, constrain parent, turn off maintain offset and apply, then delete the constraint off of the locator. Make sure it's the locator and not your group. Okay, so now the locator is right where it needs to be. Now when we transition this at 69, I can actually just use V to snap to vertex and snap to that locator position. Now the rotation is different, which is okay, but you'll see that we'll get it placed at that same point. So from here, we could play around with matching the rotation, which we can actually transfer in the locator data. You'll see that the locator stored the rotation. So I could try copying these over. So on rotate X, I could hit Control C, and then coming into the controller here on rotate X, I could hit Control V. Then coming into the locator, we could take rotate Y, Control C, here, Control V, and you might want to hit S key after creating these. Then we could come to this locator here, Control C, and then come to the controller and Control C, and Control V. And now if we hit the S key, you'll see those actually match perfectly. So we do have a perfect frame match, which isn't exactly what we want necessarily, but you'll see now when we hit play, we can at least track that to where we're picking this up, and then we are releasing this, which gives us freedom to animate it. So I don't want this to get stuck for a frame. I want this to continue forward. So just like we did with the ball, I'm going to animate this moving up. The only issue is this is moving only a frame. I may have been better off tracking the locator at the next frame, but I'll just hit the S key there, and we can just check between there and there how it's going. And then we can have it fall backwards. So we can think how long we want this to fly for. We can think of the extremes, essentially. So in here, I have the character resume. They're going to hold this position, the throw position, for probably about 8 frames. So maybe we could have them have the ball fall down somewhere between 8 to 12, maybe a little bit longer. Let's continue the robot just to make things simpler. We don't need this locator anymore, so you can actually delete that. And we can turn off the treasure controls for the moment. And we can just add a hold to this pose. So it's going to hold for about 8 frames. So we'll go to 180, and then it's going to transition back at 192 to the first pose. And I may even want to copy that over. This was the first pose I had here. I might want to take all of those, just Control C, and then come in here at 192 and Control V to transfer that entire pose. And you'll see now that's what we're going to get. Now, I want to change the translation here, though, to copy this. In particular, the translate Z and X. So I could take the translate Z and X here from this frame, Control C on these, and then come into this one and Control V. So that way it's in the same spot. I could also consider the translate Y from the previous frame. You can see there was a big jump there. If I wanted to kind of keep that a little bit less noticeable, but we will have to make some changes there because our character is in the dirt. So after that throw, we'll have to consider maybe making a few changes here, get that character to hover again. And what I might do is, rather than having the arms at this perfect relaxed state, just bring them up a bit more, or maybe bring these back and in a bit more. So that way we can keep them on screen without them being too disturbed in terms of looking tense or otherwise. Now it looks like he's squinching his arms together, which he kind of is. All right. And we'll move that out. And I want to make sure that hand gets above the sand dune. Okay, so that looks okay. And we'll just hit the S key there. So that will be our full cycle, just kind of resuming back. And with that in place, hopefully it'll give me a better idea of where I'm going to throw this object and how long it's going to need to fly for and where it's going to land. So what I'm going to look at here is we're going to chuck that. This is going to continue kind of moving outward there. And I think what I want to do is right before he transitions to the next pose, we're just going to have this gem fall from the sky. So I'm not sure how I switched my perspective there, but I did. So let's go ahead and just move this over at 178 into whatever the position is that I'm going to want this to be in. So I want to maybe make it not too far. And I could always change the position here because it's going to go off screen. Maybe something like that, so that way we can still see it here. Maybe keep it on the third if possible. And just find a nice spot in the dunes where we can have it kind of plant itself, maybe even give it some rotation so it looks good. And then in the in-between here, I'm just going to pull this way up so it arcs off the screen and it comes falling down like a meteorite. So let's check out the timing on that. I didn't quite count the frames to see how quick it is. That feels okay, and then we'll have the character resume. So I don't know if I want the character to really do a moving hold after resuming. I kind of do. Just kind of get into position and then go. I'm going to make this a very brief one, about 4 frames, so I'll go to 96 here, hit the S key, and then from here we can just have the character go on their merry way and have it hold for about 24 frames. So we could just take that to the very end. It's 196. This is where my math skills are going to throw me off. I know 4 puts me at 200, so it's probably just 220, which is correct. That's going to be where I plan to end this animation. So I'll just set this out to 220, set my range to 220, and we'll just move this character off the screen and on their merry way for about 1 second, just to see how that's going to look in terms of timing here. So I'll just pause for a second, and then they'll be on their way. Now that feels a little bit quick, so what I could do is either move him backwards a bit, which apparently I only keyframed one thing. So this way the character really takes a slow time getting off screen. And I think that feels okay. I can also check the angle it's going at. I might want to lift it a bit more. And I could always add an in-between or a breakdown frame to get it so it doesn't quite clip the ground there. And it gives us something a little bit better in terms of that. We could also play around with a different angle here. We could have it come right at the camera, which could be kind of interesting. This would be a change of angle here, which I don't know if I exactly like, but I feel like it feels a little bit better than going off to the side of the camera. So we could keep playing around with that and just kind of find the angle we feel looks right here. I don't really like the turn though, so I think I'm just going to have the character continue straight forward like we intended originally. And then that's going to hold. So I want it actually to hold here for 24 frames after the character clears it. I might want to have the character just clear the camera a little bit more, so they're going to get off screen even faster. And just kind of leave it behind, which I'm okay with that. I also might continue to raise the elevation a bit. I'm just trying to check this frame by frame because it's kind of quick here. Let's just play through the animation to see the progress so far. Okay, so that feels fine. And I think I'll end it there. If we need extra frames, we can always add them in, but this gives us at least 12 frames of, end frame, end reel, I guess you could say. So let's save. Let's make this full screen and just check it out. And make sure on that last frame, if you haven't already, highlight all the controls and hit the S key. I don't think I did. And you could actually go back to all your keyframes with the character control selected and just do that. I'm just clicking forward to make sure we have a solid keyframe on all of these. And this should work as our block-in of our extremes and our key poses. And in some ways, some of our breakdowns. This is looking pretty close to a polished animation, in all honesty. But that should give us a good start to our project and getting this animated. I may end up adjusting the camera angle just a little bit to be a bit wider here as well. It would be nice to maybe have this swoop stay on screen, and I don't really have the real estate for that necessarily. So I could come to my shot camera here. If I'm not mistaken, I've made bookmarks. If not, I can make one. And in this particular frame, go ahead and unlock this and try moving it out slightly. So let's go ahead and unlock these. Why is it not? Oh, it's a reference. Okay, I'd have to go into the reference to change that. So something I could try and do later. I don't really have a lot of wiggle room though, since I cropped the ground to this camera angle. So it might be okay if we have this go off frame for a few seconds. But let's go ahead and say I did want to make that change. Just to show you, we could save this. We could come into our reference editor, or actually not our reference editor, our project. So let's go to open scene. We can come into our sets, our shot setup 04, open this up. And the shot cam, we can unlock this. We could save. And then that gives us the ability to lock it in our main file. We could go back to our recent files, to our robot animation. And now if we needed to, we could reframe this so that here we might have the ability to see this a bit better. And we can see how that affects our entire shot. I've moved it kind of up for more screen space. I don't think it affects it too much, which is kind of nice. We can actually see some of these actions a little bit better, potentially. It does, however, change the angle for some of them, and I would not suggest doing this in a production setting, especially since these are locked. But I feel like it does give us a nice look there. Let me see. So the hand's staying on frame when we throw, which is nice. We could also do an animated camera, which isn't exactly something I'd want to do, but it could be an option. I do like the space this is giving us, though. I feel like the depth is actually reading a little bit better here. It reads less shallow, and the motions are a little bit clearer for our character. So I'll go ahead and keep this. I'll go ahead and lock this down with this new one here. It actually won't let me, which is interesting. We could bookmark it. We could also set a keyframe on the shot cam and just hit S. That way it won't accidentally get moved. And we could save. I'll do a save scene as. I'm going to make this 0102 since we made a big change on the camera here. And just look through these poses to make sure I still like them as is with this camera setup. I think it's a close enough angle to where it shouldn't be a problem, but you never know. All right, so let's get that shot camera set up here and just kind of flip through the poses just to see. I can come in here with my jump to next keyframe. All right, they all still read nice and clear. Cool. Okay, so that will be our block-in. That will get the animation fully blocked in and functional. You might have to do this in a couple chunks. You know, if you need to take some breaks, it's a lot of work in one go. But as a challenge, what I want you to do is I want you to block in your animation. So go ahead and get your extremes blocked in and get your keyframes blocked in and add in any breakdowns where necessary, you know, those anticipation frames. A lot of the times a breakdown is a keyframe, which is essential to tell the story. So get that in there, and what we're going to look at next is getting in the breakdown frames so that they look really nice, and then we'll finally get into our final in-betweens and graph adjustments. So go ahead and give that a shot, and we'll continue our journey forward.